Imagine giving someone your whole heart, only to realize they never understood the value of what they were given. Imagine being someone's moment, while they were your dream. In a world dominated by wealth, luxury, and status, people often forget that the human heart does not measure worth the same way society does. The billionaire in this story had lived his entire life surrounded by expensive things: rare cars, penthouse apartments, private jets, tailored suits, and rooms filled with possessions most people could only dream of owning. Yet none of those things ever filled the silent emptiness he carried inside. His world was built on deals, transactions, and negotiations. Everything had a price, everything could be bought. And because he had spent years treating his desires as items on a shopping list, he never realized that the things that matter most in life cannot be purchased, not with money, influence, or power. They must be earned, felt, and appreciated. This truth confronted him with brutal clarity the moment she whispered, "You were my only dream." She came into his life carrying nothing but sincerity. No diamonds, no designer clothes, no hidden motives. Just a heart that believed in love, trust, and devotion. Her innocence was not simply the physical kind. It was the purity of someone who believed that love was a gift, not a deal. She didn't love him because of his wealth or his status. She loved him because she saw the lonely man behind the fortress of luxury. She saw the human being hidden behind the mask of success. And in giving him her heart, she offered something the billionaire had never received in his entire life: unconditional affection. While others bowed to his money, she bowed only to her emotions. And as he stood there listening to her trembling whisper, he realized that the richest moment of his life came from the poorest girl he had ever known. For him, intimacy had always been a transaction, something that came easily, quickly, and without depth. He had relationships, but none that ever touched his soul. He spent money on temporary pleasures, on nights without meaning, on people who cared about his wallet more than his heart. But this time, it was different. When she gave herself to him, she gave not just her body but her trust, her first experience of vulnerability, her belief that he was someone worthy of being her dream. That purity could not be bought in any luxury store, nor could it be earned through status. It was the priceless offering of a girl who had never given herself to anyone before. And it was in that moment that he began to understand. The value of what she had given him was greater than all the money he had ever made. His tears came from a place he never knew existed, because for the first time he understood the difference between possession and meaning. He had possessed everything money could provide, yet he never felt whole. But her voice, soft and trembling, filled the emptiness inside him more deeply than any mansion or bank account ever had. He cried because he realized that what she had offered was love in its rawest form, something he had never recognized, valued, or protected. Her words were a confession, a declaration of how deeply she felt for him, and at the same time a quiet reminder of how carelessly he had treated something sacred. He cried because he understood that while he had taken something from her, she had given something to him. And giving is always more powerful than taking. In the world he lived in, everything was temporary. Deals were made and dissolved. Partnerships shifted. People came and went. But she didn't treat him like a temporary chapter. She placed her entire dream in his hands. Her dream wasn't a mansion or jewelry or luxury vacations. It was him. A simple, almost childlike belief that love could fix everything, that he could be the one person who wouldn't hurt her. The weight of that realization crushed him, because he understood that he had never been someone's dream before. People used him, admired him, or feared him, but nobody had ever loved him with such innocence. And the fact that she did made him realize just how poor he truly was in the things that mattered. We often imagine wealth as the ultimate achievement, but true richness lies in the connections we form, the love we receive, and the trust others place in us. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy the warmth of someone who loves you without conditions. It cannot buy the sincerity of a heart that beats for you alone, nor can it purchase the purity of someone who believes in you even when the world does not. When she whispered, "You were my only dream," she stripped away every layer of illusion he had built around himself. In that single moment, she showed him that he had been living in abundance but dying in emptiness. And he cried because he finally understood that true value, real, lasting, irreplaceable value, is emotional, not material. Power is often mistaken for emotional invincibility. People assume that those who have money, influence, and authority operate above fear, heartbreak, or weakness. The billionaire in this story had lived his whole life being treated as though he were unbreakable. His decisions changed companies. His voice altered the future of industries. His presence alone demanded respect. But external power does not replace internal fragility. Beneath every layer of confidence he carried, behind every command he issued, there lived a silent truth. He was human, and humans, no matter how powerful, cannot escape the soft places inside themselves. It was this truth that hit him hardest the moment she looked at him with trembling eyes that held a kind of purity and devotion he had never been offered before. For years, he used his power as armor. Money protected him from the consequences of superficial relationships. Status shielded him from emotional responsibility. Influence allowed him to walk away from heartbreak before it even had a chance to touch him. People rarely said no to him, and even fewer dared to hurt him, not because he was lovable, but because he was untouchable. Women wanted his lifestyle, not his loneliness. Business partners wanted his mind, not his story. The world, in its admiration, built walls around him so high that not even he could escape them, and so he lived with a strange illusion that he was too strong to be hurt, too wealthy to be vulnerable. But even the tallest walls crumble when the right emotion finally hits them. Her whisper was that emotion. When she whispered, "You were my only dream," something inside him shattered, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of the sudden realization that he had been avoiding the one experience everyone eventually faces, being emotionally exposed. Her words did not bow to his wealth or his influence. They went straight to the part of him he never allowed anyone to touch. It was a gentle blow, but one that reached deeper than any harsh truth ever had. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a symbol of power. He wasn't a man who owned industries and controlled markets. He was simply a boy, unprepared, unguarded, and unable to hide behind the things that once made him feel superior. Her vulnerability awakened his own. For the first time, he felt the terrifying intensity of being held responsible for someone's dream. He had never been responsible for anything so delicate. Money could fix problems, but it couldn't repair a breaking heart. Influence could move mountains, but it couldn't rewind a moment. Power could make the world obey him, but it couldn't control the emotions that now surged inside him. Her confession didn't ask for anything. She wasn't demanding love, promises, or a future. All she did was tell the truth, her truth, yet that truth felt heavier than any corporate empire he had ever managed, because empires can be rebuilt, fortunes can be regained. But innocence once hurt is a loss that echoes forever. His tears came from a place of realization, a place he didn't know existed. He understood in one painful heartbeat that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is the raw, unfiltered part of being human. And she had handed him her vulnerability without hesitation. She trusted him with her first time, her feelings, her dream, and the fragile hope that he might care the way she did. That trust disarmed him. It pierced through all the walls he had built to keep the world from reaching the softer parts of him. In every other aspect of life, he was in control. But standing there in front of her, hearing her whisper what he had meant to her, he realized he was powerless. Powerless against emotion, powerless against sincerity, powerless against the truth that love, real, honest love, makes everyone vulnerable, even billionaires. He had built a life where vulnerability was unnecessary, even dangerous. But in that moment, he finally understood something he had ignored his entire life. Power protects the body, but love touches the soul, and the soul has no shields, no armor, no defenses. It responds only to truth, affection, and connection. Her dream, simple as it was, reached a depth inside him that no amount of wealth had ever touched. His power could keep the world at his feet, but it could not stop his knees from weakening at the sound of her voice. It could command nations, but it could not stop his eyes from filling with tears. In the face of pure emotion, he realized he was not untouchable. He was human, deeply and painfully human. There is a kind of courage that does not roar, does not shout, and does not demand recognition. It is a quiet, trembling bravery, the bravery of a person who decides to open their heart completely, knowing it might break. That is the courage she carried. She was young, but her capacity for love was deeper than most people ever experience. When she chose to give herself to him, she wasn't just surrendering her innocence. She was placing her entire emotional world into his hands. This act, simple on the surface, was actually monumental. It was her way of saying, "I trust you with the most fragile part of me." And trust, especially from someone pure-hearted, is the rarest gift a person can receive. In her eyes, giving herself fully wasn't a mistake, nor was it something to be ashamed of. She believed in love with a sincerity that most people lose as they grow older. She believed that when two hearts meet in honesty, something sacred happens. But what made her brave was not the giving itself. It was the fact that she gave without expecting anything in return. She didn't ask him for a future, a promise, or a guarantee. She didn't try to bind him with her feelings or use her vulnerability as leverage. Her love was unconditional, which is the most terrifying kind of love. It requires absolute exposure, absolute sincerity, and absolute hope. Only a brave heart can love that way. He, on the other hand, had never been on the receiving end of such purity. His world was built on calculated risks and measured outcomes. He never entered any relationship without preparing an exit, but she walked into his life with no agenda, no strategy, no armor. Her decision to trust him came not from logic, but from emotion, and that is what made it so powerful. When someone who has nothing material to offer gives you everything emotional, it shows a strength that outshines any form of wealth. Her bravery was the kind that couldn't be seen, but could be felt. It was there in her trembling hands, in her soft voice, in the unguarded way she looked at him, as though he was her beginning and her end. The night she gave herself to him, she surrendered not just her body, but her fears. She took the biggest emotional leap of her life, hoping that he would catch her. But emotional leaps do not depend on physical gestures. They depend on faith. Faith that the other person will respect the gift. Faith that they will understand its value. Faith that they will not treat it as something casual or forgettable. That night, her bravery was quiet but immense. She knew that giving someone your heart means giving them the power to hurt you. But she believed in him so deeply that she accepted that risk without hesitation. She didn't just love him, she trusted him to love her back, even if only in silence. What he didn't realize until it was too late was how much courage it takes for someone so innocent to give so deeply. He had spent his life experiencing relationships that were either transactional or superficial. He had never been someone's first love. He had never been the person someone dreamed of at night or prayed for secretly. But she had woven him into her world with a sincerity he didn't know how to hold. And when she whispered, "You were my only dream," he finally understood the magnitude of what she had offered. Her words revealed the depth of her bravery, because they showed him that she had given everything, not half, not pieces, but all of herself, to someone who didn't even realize he had been handed something precious. Giving yourself fully is not the act of someone naive. It is the act of someone fearless. It is a declaration that love is worth the risk, even if the heart gets bruised along the way. And while many people spend their lives guarding themselves, hiding behind emotional walls, and refusing to be vulnerable, she chose the harder path. She chose to love with her entire being. She chose honesty over fear, trust over caution, love over protection. And in doing so, she showed him, and the world. That the bravest people are not the ones who never fall, but the ones who willingly jump, believing that love is worth every moment of uncertainty. Her bravery changed him. It awakened emotions he didn't know he had, and it forced him to confront the truth about what it means to truly give and truly receive. There is a special kind of pain that comes from understanding the truth only after it's too late. It is not the pain of losing something suddenly. It is the pain of recognizing its worth long after the moment has slipped away. For the billionaire, regret was a stranger. In business, he made mistakes, but he corrected them with money, strategy, or power. Life had taught him that everything could be fixed if the right resources were applied. But standing before her, hearing her trembling voice whisper, "You were my only dream," he confronted a reality he was completely unprepared for. Some things, once lost, cannot be bought back. Some moments, once mishandled, cannot be rewound. Her innocence, her trust, her dream, these were not items he could replace. They were one-time offerings, and he had realized their value just a fraction too late. He had treated their connection lightly, not intentionally, not cruelly, but carelessly. To him, it was a moment of warmth, of closeness, maybe even of affection. But he didn't recognize the depth she carried. He didn't see that her entire emotional world was tied to that night. In his eyes, he had spent time with her, but in her eyes, she had given everything to him. That difference in their understanding was the seed of his regret. What she saw as a life, faltering memory, he had assumed was just another chapter. Only later did it dawn on him that he had underestimated the magnitude of what he had been handed. And realization without action, without acknowledgement, reassurance, protection, turns into regret that follows a person like a shadow. His regret did not come from guilt alone. It came from awareness. Awareness that she had waited for something from him, some sign that he felt what she felt, or at least valued what she had given. But he had remained silent, thinking silence meant control, thinking distance meant strength. He never imagined that his lack of response could wound her. He believed she would understand, that she would simply move on, or that she wouldn't expect anything at all. But innocence does not work that way. Innocence attaches itself to hope. It clings to possibilities. It believes in meaning where others see nothing. And when he failed to match her emotional depth, even with simple words, the silence between them became its own kind of cruelty. Not intentional, but powerful enough to bruise something inside her. When she finally whispered her truth, it was not to demand something from him. It was to show him what he had meant all along. Her voice didn't accuse him. It didn't ask for an explanation or an apology. It simply revealed the depth of her vulnerability, and that was what broke him. Because at that moment, he realized that if only he had given her a fraction of the reassurance she deserved, if only he had acknowledged her courage, if only he had expressed even a small amount of gratitude for the trust she placed in him, the ending of their story would have been different. But life is not lived in if only. Life is lived in moments, moments that demand presence, honesty, and action, and he had let those moments pass him by. Regret is the consequence of delayed emotion. It is the punishment for hearts that wake up too slowly. For him, the weight of his realization crushed him because it was not something he could undo. Money could fix public mistakes, but it couldn't repair private wounds. Influence could shape futures, but it couldn't rewrite past moments. His tears fell not just from sorrow, but from helplessness. Helplessness at the truth that she had given him everything at the exact moment he had given her nothing. Not intentionally, but by simply not recognizing the importance of what was unfolding. And so his regret grew, not as anger, not as frustration, but as a soft, painful ache that settled deep inside him. The deepest regrets are born not from wrong actions, but from actions never taken, words never spoken, feelings never expressed, opportunities never seized. His regret was not that he had hurt her purposely. but that he had been blind to the love standing right in front of him. He realized too late that her dream could have been his too late that her vulnerability could have opened his heart, too late that she had been offering him the kind of connection money could never buy. And so, he stood there, a powerful man undone by the simplest truth. Realization without action is the most painful lesson life gives, and he had just learned it in the most devastating way possible. There are truths that change everything, not because they are loud, but because they are real. Emotional honesty is one of the rarest forms of truth, and it is often the most transformative. When she whispered, "You were my only dream," she wasn't trying to sound poetic. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to make him stay or force him into something he was not ready for. She was simply telling him what her heart had carried for so long. It was raw, it was pure, and it was painfully honest. In that single moment, she revealed a depth of emotion he had never been confronted with before. She wasn't hiding behind pride, ego, or fear. She was standing there with her soul exposed, and that honesty became the mirror in which he finally saw himself clearly. For a man who lived a life constructed on layers of control, power, routine, detachment, her emotional honesty was like a light breaking through the walls he had spent years building. He had always believed that emotion was something to manage, not something to feel. Something to avoid, not something to explore. His heart had been trained to stay guarded, to remain untouched by vulnerability. But when she looked at him with eyes full of truth and trembling sincerity, he felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't stop, hide, or silence. Her honesty became a force that reached the parts of him he never allowed anyone to touch. It was the kind of truth that didn't just speak, it awakened. Her words stripped away his defenses, not with force, but with gentleness. And gentleness, when genuine, is more powerful than any storm. Until that moment, he had lived believing that emotional distance was strength, that detachment was maturity, and that vulnerability was weakness. But what she showed him was the opposite. True strength lies in the courage to feel. She had allowed herself to feel everything without restraint. She didn't apologize for her emotions or try to minimize them. She didn't pretend to be indifferent or pretend she wanted less. And her willingness to be real with him, despite the fear of being misunderstood, judged, or rejected, became the one truth he could not ignore. It forced him to confront the emptiness inside himself. Emotional honesty has the power to change a person because it forces them to stop pretending. And for the first time in years, he stopped pretending. He was no longer the billionaire who had everything under control. He was no longer the man who could command boardrooms and silence rooms. He was simply human, flawed, vulnerable, and overwhelmed by the sudden awareness of what he had almost destroyed without even realizing it. Her honesty made him question everything he had believed about himself. It made him see that while he had succeeded in almost everything society praised, he had failed in the one thing that mattered most: connection. Real connection, human connection, the kind that cannot be measured in numbers or accomplishments. As her words settled into his heart, he felt pieces of himself rearrange. Her confession didn't only reveal her dream, it revealed his emptiness. Her vulnerability showed him the cost of his emotional detachment, and her sincerity reminded him that life is not lived in boardrooms, but in moments like this, moments where one heart touches another. He cried not just because he understood her pain, but because he finally understood his own. She had given him something he didn't know how desperately he needed: the truth. And that truth unraveled the image he had created of himself, leaving behind a man who was suddenly aware of everything he had been missing his entire life. But perhaps the most transformative part of her honesty was the way it confronted him with the possibility of change. Until then, he had believed that people simply were who they were, that he was not made for emotional depth, that he was destined to live a life of calculated relationships and controlled feelings. Yet in that moment, something inside him whispered that he could be more, that he could feel more, give more, love more. Her vulnerability didn't just reveal the truth about her feelings, it revealed the truth about his potential. Emotional honesty, when genuine, has the power to reshape a person's entire understanding of love, of connection, of purpose. And her whispered words became the beginning of that transformation, quiet, gentle, but powerful enough to leave him changed in a way he never expected. Dreams are delicate things. They grow quietly inside us, shaped by hope, trust, and the belief that something beautiful can exist if we protect it. For her, he wasn't just a passing moment or a temporary desire. He was the dream she had carried alone, silently, gently, a dream she nurtured with the innocence of someone who still believed in love's purity. But the tragedy of having a delicate dream is that it can be shattered with the slightest disappointment, the smallest silence, the softest misstep. She had placed her dream in his hands with the full trust of her heart, believing that he would understand its value, but he didn't, not at first. And fragile dreams, once bruised, bruise deeply. To her, loving him wasn't a choice. It was the natural unfolding of the emotions she'd kept hidden for so long. He represented possibility, safety, warmth. She imagined a future with him not because he was a billionaire, but because her heart simply responded to his presence. When she whispered, "You were my only dream," she wasn't dramatizing her feelings. She was revealing the truth she had lived with every day. Her dream was built on the purest foundation, love without conditions. But the very purity of that dream made it vulnerable. The more innocent a dream is, the easier it is to break. And she had handed her dream to a man who did not yet understand how to hold such tenderness. The fragility of her dream became clear the moment he realized its weight. He had assumed she would move on quickly, that her feelings were soft, not deep, fleeting, not foundational. He never imagined that he had been living inside her heart long before he ever touched her body. But dreams don't announce themselves loudly. They live in quiet places, inside glances, unspoken hopes, moments replayed at night. And because he did not see her dream, he did not protect it. He didn't reassure her, didn't express gratitude, didn't recognize that she needed something more than a moment. And every unspoken word, every unacknowledged emotion, every second of silence chipped away at a dream, making it weaker, thinner, more delicate than he ever realized. Dreams, especially emotional ones, are made of threads of trust, expectation, and belief. She had woven these threads carefully, lovingly, with a heart that believed he was worth the risk. But when he didn't return her emotional openness, those threads began to fray. Not because she doubted her feelings, but because she began to feel alone in them. Fragile dreams survive only when they are held, nurtured, and honored. When they are ignored, they fade. When they are mishandled, they break. And when she whispered the truth of her dream, she was also revealing how close it was to being shattered, how fragile her heart had become in her silence. For him, the realization struck like a storm. Her dream wasn't small, it wasn't childish. It was something sacred, something she had guarded for years before giving it to him. And the fragility of that dream made his heart ache in ways he had never experienced. Because he understood in that instant that he had been trusted with something more valuable than money, more precious than loyalty, more delicate than any treasure he had ever owned. He had been trusted with her dream. That realization tore through him, because now he understood the responsibility he had failed to meet. Her dream broke him precisely because of its fragility, because he saw how easily he had damaged something that should have been cherished. Dreams do not die loudly, they break in silence, slowly, quietly, painfully, and the most fragile dreams are the ones built on love, innocence, and hope. She had dared to dream of him with every part of her heart. She had embraced the possibility of a future with him without hesitation, and that dream, in its fragility, held the most profound truth, that real love is both beautiful and breakable. Her whisper revealed not just her feelings, but the vulnerability of everything she believed in. And he cried because he finally understood that fragile dreams are not weak. They are the bravest dreams of all. They require courage, faith, and surrender. And he realized, far too late, that her fragile dream had been the most precious gift he had ever been given. And so, in that quiet room where two very different worlds had collided, everything suddenly became clear. He stood there, a man who had spent his whole life believing he owned the world, finally realizing that the only thing he had ever truly wanted was something he had never learned how to hold. Her innocence, her trust, her dream. None of these belonged to the world he lived in, yet they were the only things that had ever made him feel alive. His empire had given him power, but she had given him meaning. And when her whisper cut through the silence, revealing the fragile truth she had carried alone, he understood the price of not seeing it sooner. She looked at him with eyes full of questions, full of hope, full of fear. But for the first time he had no words, only the ache of everything he wished he could undo. He wanted to tell her that her dream wasn't foolish, that her heart wasn't wrong, that her trust wasn't wasted. He wanted to say that she had awakened something inside him that he didn't even know existed. But apologies felt too small for the depth of what she had given him, and too late for the moment they stood in. So instead, he did the one thing he had never done in front of anyone. He broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the soft, helpless way a person breaks when they finally see the truth of themselves. Tears slipped down his face, not for what he had done, but for what he had failed to understand, for the dream he had been given, for the girl who had loved him with a purity he never deserved, for the moment he could never get back. And she watched him, stunned, as the man the world feared finally stood unmasked. No power, no armor, no control. Just a heart learning, too late, the meaning of tenderness. Some stories end with grand gestures or perfect promises, but theirs ended with a lesson, one carved into both their hearts, that love is fragile, that dreams are sacred, and that the greatest regret of all is recognizing the value of something only after it's gone.